The day I retired from 28 years as an offshore drilling engineer, I didn't fly home to a celebration. I flew home to an empty driveway, a cold house, and a silence that felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. My name is Joel Mercer. I'm 53 years old. I spent the better part of 3 decades rotating in and out of the Gulf of Mexico on 6-week cycles, 6 weeks offshore, 3 weeks home. My wife Diane knew this when she married me. She said she admired the discipline. She said she respected the sacrifice. She said a lot of things over 22 years that turned out to be performances. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I met Diane at a company barbecue in Beaumont, Texas in 2002. I was 31. She was 28, recently moved from Baton Rouge, working as an administrative coordinator for one of the subcontractors on our project. She had this laugh, loud, unself-conscious, the kind that fills a room and makes strangers smile. I was a quiet man who spent most of his social energy pretending to be less quiet than he was. She seemed like the answer to something I hadn't known how to ask. We dated for 14 months and got married in April of 2004 at a venue outside Houston. My older brother, Warren, was my best man. My father flew in from Phoenix and cried during the ceremony, which surprised everyone because he was not a man given to visible emotion. Diane's parents were there. Her sister was her maid of honor. Everything felt right. 3 years later, our son was born. We named him Eli. A year after that, our daughter came, Rosalind, who we called Roz almost immediately. By the time Roz was walking, I was fully committed to the offshore schedule, and Diane had left the subcontractor job to raise the kids. We bought a house in Cypress, a suburb northwest of Houston. 4 bedrooms, a big backyard, mature oak trees along the fence line. We had a dog named Biscuit who was mostly useless but deeply loved. I won't tell you our marriage was perfect. It wasn't. Any relationship where one person is gone 6 weeks at a time and home 3 has a rhythm that takes constant maintenance. I called every evening I could get signal. I sent gifts on birthdays and anniversaries and random Tuesdays because someone told me once that random gestures matter more than obligatory ones. When I was home, I tried to be fully home. Coaching Eli's Little League team, driving Roz to her dance recitals, cooking dinner on weekends because Diane had earned the break. What I didn't do was pay attention to the signals. There were signals. I know that now. When I look back, I can see them stacked up like the rings on a cut tree, clear and obvious once you know where to look. The way she started keeping her phone face down on the kitchen counter, the way she stopped asking about my rotations, which she used to track obsessively on a calendar in the mudroom. The way certain conversations started feeling like she was reading from a script, engaged on the surface, somewhere else underneath. I told myself it was the natural distance that settles into a long marriage. I told myself she was tired, that 20+ years of managing a household mostly solo would wear anyone down. I told myself a lot of things. The retirement was supposed to fix it. That was my plan, 28 years offshore, and the deal I'd made with myself when we got married was that I would get out before 60, come home for good, be present, give her the husband she deserved instead of the one who showed up for 3-week windows and then disappeared again. I had a generous pension, a substantial 401k, and a prenuptial agreement that my father, a methodical man who'd watched 2 of his friends get financially destroyed in divorces, had insisted on before the wedding. I'd felt guilty about asking Diane to sign it. She'd been gracious about it, signed without complaint. I was glad later that she had. My last rotation ended on a Thursday in October. I flew into Houston Intercontinental at 2 in the afternoon. Diane knew I was coming. I'd texted her from the platform before boarding the helicopter to shore, and again from the gate in New Orleans during my layover. She said she'd be there. Said she was excited. Used the word finally in a way that made me feel warm. She wasn't at the terminal. I waited 45 minutes at baggage claim, texting and calling. Nothing. I called Warren, who hadn't heard from her. I called Eli, who was away at college in Austin and hadn't spoken to his mother in a few days. I called Roz, who was at school in Dallas, and who said, "She probably just lost track of time, Dad. You know how she is." I did know how she was. This wasn't it. I took a rideshare home. The driver was a veteran, Army, 2 tours in Iraq, retired. We talked the whole 40-minute drive in the way that strangers sometimes do when they recognize something familiar in each other. He asked what I did. I told him I just retired. He congratulated me and asked what the plan was. I said, spending time with my wife, finally. He laughed and said, retirement had a way of showing you exactly who you'd married. I didn't know how right he was. The house was empty when I got there. Lights off, no car in the garage. I brought my bags in, changed out of my travel clothes, and sat in the kitchen trying not to catastrophize. She had probably run an errand. She had probably lost track of time. I poured a glass of water and stood at the counter and looked at her calendar on the wall. She still kept a paper calendar, old habit, and saw that today was marked. In her handwriting. Joe Helm. She had written it weeks ago. She knew. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just a number I'd never seen. The message said, "Just so you know, she's not going to be there when you get home. And she won't be able to explain where she is. You deserve to know the truth. Check the camera on the garage." I stood there for a long moment, reading it twice. We had a security camera system I'd installed 3 years earlier, mostly because of a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. 4 cameras, front door, back door, garage interior, driveway. I pulled out my laptop, opened the app, and scrolled back through the garage footage from that afternoon. At 12:47 p.m., while I was still in the air, a silver sedan I didn't recognize pulled into the garage. Diane's car was already inside. The sedan parked. A man got out. I recognized him. His name was Spencer Alcott. He was the director of operations at the property management company where Diane had gone back to work part-time about 4 years ago, once Roz started high school. I had met him exactly twice. Once at a company holiday party, once when he'd stopped by the house to drop off some paperwork. Both times he'd shaken my hand and looked me directly in the eye and said it was good to meet me. I watched him walk into my house through the garage door that my wife held open for him. They left together at 4:02 p.m. She drove. His car stayed in my garage. I closed the laptop. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. I wasn't calm. I wasn't calm. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time doing something I can only describe as internal system shutdown. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, but is instead the absence of all the noise that's been running underneath everything for longer than you realized, like when a machine stops and you finally hear how loud it had been. Then I got methodical. That's what I do. Offshore engineering teaches you that feelings are for later and action is for now. I pulled up our joint bank account on my phone. Nothing unusual in the recent transactions, but I noticed a recurring charge to a hotel in the Heights neighborhood of Houston, a boutique place I'd never heard of, appearing on the 3rd Friday of every month for the past 14 months. Always the same amount, always a Friday, when Diane had told me for the past year plus that she was attending a book club. 14 months. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a family law specialist in Houston named Patricia Owens, who had done some estate planning work for me a few years back. She didn't answer, so I left a message saying I needed to meet as soon as possible and that it was urgent. The second call was to my financial advisor to ask about separating my accounts. Then I sat down and waited. Diane came home at 7:15. She walked in through the garage door the same way she always did, keys in one hand, phone in the other, and she was 3 steps into the kitchen before she saw me at the table. She stopped. Her face went through several things very quickly. Surprise, then something that tried to be happiness, then something underneath that she covered fast, but not fast enough. "Joel," she said, "you're home." "I've been home since 4, I said. "I'm so sorry. I completely lost track of time. I was at sit down," I said. She sat. I put my phone on the table, face up, with the security camera footage paused on a clear frame of Spencer walking into my house at 12:47 p.m. She looked at it. She didn't say anything for a long moment. "How long?" I asked. She looked at her hands. "Joel, how long, Diane?" "About 2 years," she said. Her voice was quiet. 2 years. Half of those 6-week rotations, while I was on a platform in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, waking up at 5 in the morning to do a job I had done for 3 decades so that my family would be secure and comfortable and cared for. 2 years of that. "The hotel in the Heights," I said. "That's been 14 months. She looked up. I could see her recalculating, figuring out how much I knew. "It started before the hotel," she said. "We were careful at first. I'm sure you were." She tried then, the way they always try when they're cornered. She talked about loneliness. She talked about the rotations, about how hard it had been to raise the kids with me gone half the time, about how she'd felt invisible in our marriage. She talked about Spencer like he was a revelation, something that had happened to her rather than something she had chosen over and over for 2 years. I listened. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, I'm filing for divorce. I've already left a message with my attorney. Joel, please, I want you to hear something. I opened my laptop and played the footage from the garage. Spencer getting out of the car. Diane holding the door. The timestamp. I also want you to know, I said, that I'm aware of the bank statement, the hotel, and I still have the prenuptial agreement you signed in 2003. I had Patricia review it 2 years ago when we updated our estate documents. It's airtight. Her face changed. You can't be serious. I am completely serious. Elaine told me those things don't hold up. She stopped herself. Elaine? I said. Who's Elaine? She pressed her lips together. Spencer's wife. I learned later that Spencer's wife was named Elaine. Diane had apparently been communicating with her. I have no idea in what capacity, whether confessing or gloating or something else entirely, and I didn't care to know. What mattered was that the prenup was valid, and that in the state of Texas, documented infidelity has real legal weight. Patricia confirmed this when she called me back at 9 a.m. the next morning. There was something else I needed to do before Diane left that house, though. I want you to call Eli and Roz, I said. She looked at me. Tonight, right now. Both of them. On speaker. You're going to tell them why we're getting divorced, in your own words, because they deserve to hear it from you and not wonder for years what happened to their family. Joel, please don't make me, you made your choices for 2 years, I said. You can make this one phone call. She called Eli first. It was almost 8 o'clock, and he answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been expecting something was wrong. She told him. Her voice cracked in the middle of it. Eli was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Dad, are you there? And I said yes, and he said, I'm sorry, Dad. I love you. He didn't say anything to his mother except goodbye. She called Roz. Roz cried and then got angry in the way that Roz has always responded to things that hurt her, loudly, with no softening. She said things to her mother that I won't repeat because they came from a place of real pain, and it's not my story to tell. She told her mother she needed time. She told her mother not to call for a while. Then she asked to talk to me, and I took the phone off speaker and walked to the other room, and Roz said, Daddy, are you okay? And I said I would be, and she said, good, because you didn't deserve this. You never deserved this. And I had to clear my throat twice before I could answer. After the calls, Diane packed a bag. I had already been through the guest room and removed the spare key from the lockbox I'd kept there. I took her house keys before she walked out, changed the locks the next morning because I'm my father's son and I don't leave gaps. She asked at the door if there was any chance. I thought about it honestly. That's the thing people don't expect. That after this kind of thing, the anger is almost secondary. What's primary is grief. Grief for the marriage you thought you had. Grief for the person you thought you knew. I had genuinely loved Diane. Part of me probably always would. But love and trust are not the same thing, and the trust was gone. Completely. The moment I saw that garage footage. No, I said. There's no chance. She left. I stood in my kitchen alone for the first time in that house. 22 years of marriage. 21 years in that house. 2 kids raised. 1 dog buried under the oak tree in the backyard. All of it rearranging itself into something I was going to have to understand differently now. The next morning, I got up at 5 old habit, offshore schedule, and made coffee and sat on the back porch in the October cool and thought about what came next. Patricia was confident. Texas recognizes fault in divorce proceedings. With documented infidelity, a valid prenuptial agreement, and the prenup's specific clauses around infidelity, Diane's options were narrow. She would receive a portion of our joint savings per the prenup's terms, nothing more. My pension was protected. The house, which had been purchased with the inheritance from my father's estate, was mine per the prenup's language. Patricia said it would take time, but the outcome was not really in question. What surprised me was Spencer's wife. Elaine called me. I don't know how she got my number. I assumed Diane had it in her contacts somewhere and something spilled in the fallout. Elaine called me about a week after everything happened. She was calm in a way that sounded expensive. The way people are calm and had made a decision and the shaking is behind them. She'd found out the same week I had. She had her own attorney. She had her own attorney. She had her own documentation. Spencer had been sloppy. Men having affairs usually are. Eventually, and Elaine, it turned out, had been suspicious for close to a year and had quietly been building a record. We talked for almost 2 hours that first call. We talked about our kids. She had 2 daughters, both in middle school, who were wrecked by the news. We talked about the particular loneliness of being the last one to know something that has apparently been known by the universe for some time. We talked about what it meant to rebuild a life at 50 plus, when the structure you thought was solid turns out to have been hollow for years. Elaine was a project manager for a hospital system in Houston, competent, wry, with a habit of saying exactly what she meant without decoration that I found deeply refreshing after a week of emotional fog. She called again 3 days later to tell me she'd hired a new attorney and to share a piece of documentation her investigator had found that was relevant to a shared timeline between Spencer and Diane. She was organized. She was generous. She made me laugh about something the third time we talked, which surprised me enough that I had to sit with it for a moment. We started meeting for coffee. Just coffee. An hour in the morning before she had to get to work. We talked about the divorces, about the kids, about the strange grief of loving someone who turned out to be someone else. We talked about our work, our backgrounds. I found out she'd grown up in Corpus Christi, that she'd been an athlete in college, that she had opinions about barbecue that she defended with genuine intensity. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, without either of us naming it, something shifted. I want to be honest about the timeline because I'd thought about it enough to know it matters to me. I didn't start anything with Elaine until both divorces were well underway. I'm not that man, and I don't want to be. What happened between us grew out of the context of two people who'd been genuinely hurt, who were being honest with each other in a way that neither of us had apparently been getting in our marriages, and who were gradually, carefully, choosing to trust again. The divorces moved forward. Diane retained an attorney who made some aggressive initial demands and then retreated sharply when Patricia laid out the documentation and the prenup. The process took 8 months. There were mediations and paperwork and conversations I don't need to relive. At the end of it, I kept the house, my pension, and my dignity. Diane received her share of joint savings per the prenup's terms, fair, which is all I had ever asked of any of this. Spencer didn't fare well. Elaine's attorney was, by all accounts, formidable. Spencer had not had a prenup. The property they'd bought together in River Oaks, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Houston, was subject to full equitable division. He moved into a rental after the settlement. He also resigned from his position at the property management company, though I was told it was framed as a mutual decision. Elaine did not gloat about any of this when she told me. She stated it the way you state a fact you've already processed and set down. Ely drove down from Austin the weekend after everything became final. We sat on the back porch and drank beer and talked for 4 hours. Really talked, the way fathers and adult sons sometimes don't get around to until something cracks things open. He told me he'd suspected something was off for a while but hadn't known what to do with it. I told him that wasn't his to carry. We talked about his plans after graduation, about the job offers he was weighing, about the girl he was seeing who he described with the carefully neutral language of someone who cares very much and doesn't want to jinx it. It was one of the best evenings I can remember. Roz took longer. She and her mother had a fractured period that I stayed out of. That was their relationship to work through. But Roz and I talked on the phone every Sunday, and she visited twice during the divorce, sleeping in her old room and cooking elaborate meals in the kitchen because she'd picked up cooking in college and needed an audience. She was doing the hard work of deciding what she thought about her mother, separately from what she thought about me, which seemed exactly right and exactly what I'd hoped she'd managed to do. About 6 months after the divorce was final, Elaine and I made it official, meaning we told our kids and stopped pretending we were just friends who got coffee on weekday mornings. Both sets of kids had figured it out independently before we said anything, which is humbling but probably correct. Ely was calm and supportive. Roz met Elaine over dinner in Houston and texted me afterward. "She's good, Dad. You can relax. Elaine's daughters needed more time, which was fair, and we gave it. I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything worked out perfectly, or that there's no grief left in any corner of this. There is. There are still moments. Pulling into my driveway, sitting at the kitchen table, watching the oak trees in the backyard lose their leaves in October, when I feel the weight of what was lost. 22 years. A version of my life that I had believed in completely. That doesn't just dissolve, but here's what I've learned. Betrayal shows you who people really are, including yourself. I learned that I was more resilient than I'd known, that my kids were more capable of navigating hard truths than I'd given them credit for, that the capacity for honesty that I'd been quietly starving for in my marriage was actually available in the world. I just hadn't found it yet. Elaine and I are taking our time. There's no rush. We're both old enough to know that the foundation matters more than the timeline. We're both honest with each other in ways that feel, after what each of us went through, almost startlingly simple. She tells me when something bothers her. I tell her the same. Nobody's keeping score. Biscuit is still alive, which continues to defy veterinary expectation. He's 12 now, mostly deaf, spends his days in the patch of sunlight that moves across the living room floor by late afternoon. He doesn't know anything changed. He just knows someone comes home every evening now, every single evening, and sits with him. That part, at least, turned out better than I expected. People ask me sometimes, friends, my brother Warren, even Eli once over beers on the back porch, whether I'm angry, whether I still carry it. And the honest answer is that anger was never really the dominant thing. What I carried, and still carry in smaller doses now, is the strangeness of discovering that a life you believed in completely was being quietly hollowed out from the inside. That's not rage. That's something more disorienting than rage. It's the moment you bite into something and realize the core isn't there. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this over the past couple of years, is that the outcomes in my life weren't accidental. They followed directly from choices. Mine and Diane's both. I spent 28 years making choices that were, whatever their costs, honest. I showed up. I called when I could. I came home and tried to be present. I signed a prenuptial agreement when my father asked me to, not because I distrusted Diane, but because I respected the seriousness of what we were building. Those choices, unglamorous as they were, accumulated quietly into a foundation. I didn't know how much I'd need it until the ground shifted. Diane made different choices. And I think what people miss when they talk about infidelity is that it's never one choice. It's hundreds of small ones made over months and years. The first lie, then the decision to tell another to cover it, then the hotel on the third Friday of every month for 14 months. Each choice made the next one easier. Each one built a structure too, just in the opposite direction. And when it all came down, it came down completely, because that's what happens to things built on concealment. They don't weather slowly. They collapse. I'm not standing here telling you I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. There were nights during those 8 months of divorce proceedings when I sat in that kitchen at 2 a.m, not handling it well at all. Grief doesn't follow a schedule, and mine had its own stubborn timeline. But I kept making the same kinds of choices I'd always made. Show up, be honest, deal with what's in front of you rather than what you wish was there. It's not a dramatic philosophy. It doesn't require anything exotic. It just requires deciding, over and over, to do the next right thing, even when you don't feel like it. The resilience I found surprised me. I think it surprises most people when they find it in themselves, because you can't really know it's there until something tests it. What I learned is that I was capable of absorbing a very hard truth, reorganizing around it, and continuing to build. That's not toughness in any performed sense. It's just the capacity to keep going when keeping going is all you have. And then there's Elaine. I didn't look for her. I wasn't ready for her. She arrived in the aftermath. Someone else who'd been hurt and was choosing honesty over bitterness, and something real grew out of that. I think that part of the story matters too. Not as a reward, but as evidence that what you choose to become after a devastating thing shapes everything that follows. I chose not to harden. She did the same. That turned out to be the foundation for something worth having. Illy asked me once what I'd do differently. I told him honestly, not much on my end. I'd sign the prenup again. I'd install the security cameras again. I'd call my attorney the same evening. The one thing I might change is paying closer attention to the signals. The phone face down. The calendar she stopped updating. The distance that I'd explained away as tiredness. Not to prevent it necessarily, because you can't control another person's choices. But to know sooner, to not spend years being the last to understand what's happening in your own house. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Know what's actually in front of you. Look at it clearly, without the filter of what you want to be true. Honesty about reality, even when reality is painful, is the only solid place to stand. Everything else follows from there.